Hey everyone, we are starting and we'll be going live. So just giving it a couple of seconds for everyone to join. But in the meantime, while you are here, feel free to let us know where you're watching from. Alright, so we're gonna give it just a couple of more seconds. Also, today is Spirit Day, and so if you haven't already, hopefully you wore purple. I wore my purple mask, even though I didn't go outside. But definitely support Spirit Day, which encourages people to speak out and stand up against bullying, particularly for LGBTQ youth that GLAD is doing. So, welcome to the third episode of United We Rise, every Black Body live series. United We Rise is pioneering Black-led intersectional initiative to end HIV for every Black body. And I'm Deshawn Usher, and I'm happy to share tonight's conversation with Victor Jackson, an artist, choreographer, and creative director, overall amazing person. And we will discuss why every Black body deserves a seat at the table. And the table we're discussing tonight is the table of media, from entertainment to news, and we want you to pull up a seat and let's get into it. So I'll be having Victor join.
Hi. Wait, let me
Hey.
let me adjust my light. I wanna
Oh, you want good? Don't
I
worry, it's
wanna
okay. Get your
beam it
light.
up a little bit. There you
Okay.
go.
Oh, look, you are full framed, and you
Yes.
have yours, and I'm fixing my camera. We'll sit up so that I'm not. I hate the lives like when your face is
Right, where
like.
you're like, hey,
Hmm.
thanks for having me here.
So no, I'm so excited to be speaking with you tonight, particularly since it's centered around community engagement. We'll be talking about like health and wellness and disparities. And now you're giving me half face.
I know.
Look,
I
no,
was like,
it's fine. It's fine.
I
It's
can
fine.
get it.
You're taking your notes. You get
Yes, we're talking about all those things, so I want to make
talking.
sure I'm lit. No, okay, yes.
No, it's gonna be. I'm so excited though that like you are able to join us, particularly for this conversation. And so our topic today is about community engagement and the role media can play in the Black community, particularly as it relates to health disparities that currently exist. All right.
Yes.
So let's start. Look, as you find your light, I'm finding my angle. Um, so let's start with community engagement. So, what communities do you represent?
I proudly represent the Black and queer community.
Hmm.
And for me, just representing that community really means creating spaces for people who look and love like me to be able to express themselves as a creative. I feel like I have the power and the platform and the privilege,
Hmm.
honestly, to carve out spaces for people who may not always be able to live in their truth fully. And so, in the like spirit of that, I started the Pride and Soul Festival
Hmm.
last year. We did the first one on Juneteenth, 2019, and we featured seven Black queer artists. We had two Black queer DJs. We had a Black trans woman as our hostess. And so this year, in light of the pandemic, I was really like, how can I still create this
Hmm.
space? And so I was so happy to be able to connect with Creative Loafing Atlanta, which is an arts and culture publication here, and present Pride and Soul, both unplugged and digital. So this series is actually rolling out. The first installment was premiered last Thursday. I'm sorry, that was my performance actually. And
Which
the second installment premiered an hour ago. So you can look out for that all throughout LGBT plus History Month on Creative Fluffing Atlanta.
No, and honestly, it's been so amazing, one, to see your performance that you created, but then also how you've been able to bring other folks along, right? And so while you had your platform and your festival, you, even amidst like a global pandemic, you decided that, hey, I still want to create, and I still also want to create opportunities for other members within my community
Yeah.
to like showcase like their artistry also. So with that, I guess like what has community engagement looked like for you
I
when creating
mean,
that?
honestly, in also with Pride and Soul, that's an opportunity for me to directly engage with other Black queer artists, but also even as a teaching artist. I just watched the Facebook Live that you hosted an hour ago, and
That we
one
just
of
got off of.
yeah, and one of the panelists, Stacy, who's actually a friend of mine, she was saying how she intentionally tries to be who she needed as a child. And
Mm,
like for me as a teaching artist, I'm able to work with students who are Black and or queer, and I'm able to be a representation to them of what freedom looks like, what creativity looks like through a vessel that is both Black and queer. And that is such an incredible opportunity because not only am I able to engage with community, but I'm also able to invest in the future.
mm. So speaking of that, what has it been like to be like a creative and operate like in the world of advocacy, right?
Hmm.
So we know that art and most creative arts is an
Yeah.
expression of like activism and advocacy. And so what has that like lane look like for you?
It's actually interesting recently due to coronavirus and everything. I have worked with Candy Bears before, and we were planning on doing like this Pride tour for 2020 and really
Hmm.
engaging with her queer audience, specifically her Black queer audience, but her queer audience for sure. And she had released a record with Todrick Hall, and we were just like, and oh shoot. And Precious, sorry. I want to
Hmm.
make sure I shout out her as well. But yeah, she had released a single and we were ready to do this Pride tour, and then the pandemic came and we were like, all right, well, what can we do? And not only did the pandemic come, but
Hmm.
also just a social uprising that was a result of the murders of Breonna Taylor
Hmm.
and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery. And so I was able to like use my platform and my privilege to like talk to Candy about engaging in conversations, both social justice conversations with like Chelsea Miller from Freedom March NYC, with
Mila Jam.
yeah, Mila Jam, like all those
Yeah.
conversations. So we were able to talk about what was happening in the social justice arena, but also with Pride. And Candy talked to Mila Jam, like you said, and Haley
Hmm.
Sahar and Jack Mizrahi. And so I think a lot of times it's important for us to be dot connectors, right? Whatever
Hmm.
we can't do ourselves, it's important for us to be conduits of information and a bridge for communities that may not necessarily always be connected to really meet. And in me bringing that to Candy from like my position of a creative director, I was able to have give those people across industries and across the spectrum of sexuality an opportunity to get their voices heard on a larger platform.
Yeah, and honestly, that's one of the things that I definitely had appreciated about the work that you were doing with her. I mean, one, she looked amazing all of June and everything that she rolled out. It was like, oh, what? Okay, Victor. But it's the people that you don't always see like behind the scenes, right? And it's that intersection that you're able to think about and like again be those like bridges and connectors to bring others along while you're engaging community. Particularly like when, like with the work that you do with the intersection, like Atlanta, and having that first conversation of heart to heart, I thought was absolutely brilliant of having like a black heterosexual cisgendered woman, Candy, have a conversation with a black trans woman, Mila Jam, who at the end of the day, they're both black women that are singers and songwriters in the music industry, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
two totally spectrums of like their experiences, but have this shared commonality. And you gave them that opportunity, one, to have the conversation, but that's exactly what community like mobilization and community engagement looks like. That's
for sure.
exactly what community representation and like your advocacy, right? And so it wasn't you like putting up a fit and or like protesting, but it is thinking about like how do you use like your art and your connections to connect people and bring
Yeah.
people together. And so with that, when we think about it, like whose story um is currently not being told. And so I know that again, like you've been able to share and create these opportunities for folks because like for some of these people, like in particularly some of the communities that they represent, like their stories aren't always told within like the media. And so similar to the last live panel was the conversation about like sometimes we have to create our own media, right? And we
Yeah.
have to create our own outlets to get those stories out, particularly if you're creative. And so what stories do you think like still need to be told, and or that haven't been told?
Yeah, I think when I look at the landscape of media right now, specifically in TV and film, we are seeing this like surge of black produced and written and directed TV and film, and a lot, and we're touching on a lot of great things. You have Greenleaf, you have Lovecraft Country, you have Insecure, but in a lot of those places and in a lot of those spaces, what you don't see are black queer people living fully rounded lives.
Mm-hmm.
And what I understand is that, if we look at Good Times, if we look at the Jeffersons, if we look at 227, the way that black people were reflected on screen, that has evolved. And it's
Yeah.
evolved, for our community as a whole. And now I think we have an opportunity to go into smaller pockets of who black people are and how they exist and where they exist and
Mm-hmm.
tell fully rounded stories. Who's a black gay man on TV right now who has a job, a love interest, a relationship with his parents, who has, I mean, if you break down the archetype of Insecure, of, Issa's character on Insecure, if you look at just think about all of these shows that we really, really love
Mm-hmm.
and that we're really loving to watch. We're not seeing, they have like now it's almost like the gay friend has now become what used to be like the black girlfriend, the black homegirl,
Mm-hmm.
where like every white lead character had like a
One.
sister girl. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now every, you find a like, oh, they have like one gay friend and you see that friend and that friend meets them to go shopping or meets them to go out to eat, but and they talk about like, oh, sexual exploits and all those things. And it's great that queer people can appear magical and can
Mm-hmm.
appear fabulous in all these spaces, but queer people also have you know a lot of more layers, and I think that is something that we're missing. And then just like as in terms of music,
Mm-hmm.
we aren't seeing the same effort and money put into black queer artists specifically as we are seeing put into white queer artists. And I think there is
Mm-hmm.
time for us to invest in the full spectrum of black queer artistry, whether that is Kaylani, Azion, Emanike, Kate's the Killer, Vincent, Duran Bernard. Like there's a
You,
whole set me,
you.
period. You know
Like,
what I mean? There's a whole spectrum of
mm-hmm.
different sounds, of different influences, of different, regions where this black queer music is coming out of. And I think it's high time that those artists, including myself, get the platforms, and that, I mean, but also that's why we are all creating now, and
Right.
that's why we're always carving out space for ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, and for others, it literally like everything that you just said was the reason one why I created Moby. Mainly was because it was like it didn't exist. Like we didn't have spaces, and I was
Hmm.
just, over literally having the lack of space, right, to
Hmm.
convene, to network, to build, to
Hmm.
come together. And when we talk about community engagement, we can't talk about that without like the absence of space, right? And
Hmm.
so if it's whether it's virtual or whether it's physical, it's like if we're lacking those spaces to actually make those connections, then what it makes it even harder for us to get the resources that we need. It makes it harder for us to get the information that we need. It makes it harder for us to literally connect and move each other forward.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
then thinking about with the Moby playlist of like which we just started, in
Hmm.
part of shameless plug, it's available on all platforms, but it'll also feature Victor's music,
Yay.
but Ozion and
Hmm.
Delon and Eric, and all these, and Victoria
Hmm.
Monet. But it's also just thinking that it's so many like creatives out there that despite this global pandemic that have poured their heart and artistry into like this music and entertainment. And oftentimes we sometimes will get it's funny because it is thinking that sometimes we may have like that representation that like no one exists, and then that erases like the art that sort of kind of is out there, right?
Yeah.
But it's not that it doesn't exist, it's that like they're like these like people, like their music, their art, their creations that they're doing just isn't being amplified the
Right.
same, which is exactly what you were talking about when it came to like other like white queer artists compared to black queer artists, and it's just not the same level of overall support. And so it's
Hmm.
thinking about like how do we continue to provide like that support to folks, because then it makes it really difficult to do that.
For sure.
So segue in, speaking of support, this has nothing to do with that, but health. So when it
Hmm.
comes to health and wellness, particularly for the Black community, what are some of the health disparities that stand out?
Um, Food deserts
I
is
used to live
one.
in one. I
Yeah,
know.
I think it's one huge thing because
Mm,
what we eat affects how we live. And so you still have like years and years and years of Black people eating whatever they can get, and that is what
mm,
started all the way back, from slavery, and not getting the best of food and produce that is available. And
mhm,
so that then, lends itself to high blood pressure, to diabetes, to high cholesterol, to all of those things. And then I think another thing, especially within the Black queer community, is the conversations that we are not, the open conversations that we're not having
mm.
about sexual health.
Right.
Growing up in the church, I was never, encouraged to have safe sex practices. I was encouraged not to have sex, but to be encouraged to not
Mm,
have sex, but also see, the pastor's wives, not the pastor's wives, but the pastor's daughters, or, other people in the choir pregnant. It's like people are having sex. You know what I mean? Like people are
but we're
having
not going
sex.
to talk about it.
You know what I mean? And people are having sex before marriage, and people are getting pregnant, and we're having baby showers. But you know what I mean? Like if we're not having those conversations about, how to protect yourself,
Mhm.
how to have safe sex practices, how often should you get tested, like all of those things. If we're not having those conversations under the false sense of, holiness, and all of those things, then we're not adequately preparing the next generation
Mm,
to live full, whole, healthy lives. And so I think those are the two main things that are top of mind for me.
for it. Yeah, and so when we think about COVID-19, we know that it has impacted literally everyone
Hmm.
in the world. But it's thinking about like what has that effect been for you, one personally, and also thinking about other creatives, right? And so we
Hmm.
know that COVID-19 if people aren't like familiar, but
Hmm.
it literally has crippled industries,
Yeah.
especially like creative industries. So when we think about journalism, which means what? There's less
Hmm.
journalists to report and cover, which means there's less there's already like less diverse stories that
Hmm.
we've seen. And so now imagine like furloughed like newsrooms, right?
Right.
Where the only voice and the only perspective, like again, we were barely in those rooms.
Yeah.
And so now thinking about like inside of that industry, inside of other industries, the theater industry is heavily impacted. We know that like
Sure.
people, again, in the music industry, especially live performance, is like deeply impacted. So what has that been like for you, like when it came to like COVID-19?
Yeah, for me personally, I lost my great grandmother to COVID-19 in April.
Mhm.
So that was a personal loss that affected me and affected my family uh, greatly. And so that was like, a shake. I had just seen her at the top of March, like right before New York shut down for quarantine. And
Mhm.
so, and her birthday was in May, was going to be, I mean, her birthday is in May. But we were supposed to be having this big celebration for her. She was turning 95. And so that shook me. And I would say like March and April were really just like rocky months for me. And then as far as like professional aspects, I was slated to do the first TEDx Morehouse College
Mhm.
that got postponed. I was supposed to be teaching in a couple of different countries this summer that got canceled. Choreographing a musical at Dallas Theater Center that got postponed as well.
Mhm.
And so all of those cancellations is interesting because as an artist, you get used to hearing no. You've almost like prepared yourself, but
Mhm.
there's a different burn of like getting the yes and signing the contract and even getting a deposit, and then it's like canceled, canceled, canceled. And so there was a lot of kind of like going inward that I had to do
Mhm.
to really ask myself and to ask God, like, what is it? What is there for me to learn in this time of stillness? And if you think about like everything in life, there's a moment. I'm always talking about like harvesting and planting seeds and all those things. And so, there's a moment where you're like digging up the ground and you're patting in
Mhm.
fertilizer and planting seeds and all those other things. And then there's a moment where the seed has to sprout and take root. And I
Mhm.
realized that for me, this was a moment for things that I had planted, seeds that I had planted in various areas of my life to really sprout and take
Mhm.
root. And now,
Mhm.
as we're, further into the pandemic and we've been sitting in this moment for some time, I have started doing a lot of digital work.
Yeah.
I like you spoke of earlier, we did a virtual ball for Candy for Pride. I have worked on two digital productions for regional theaters here in Atlanta. And then I was also able to perform for the first Global Black Gay Pride virtually as well. And so I'm finding that though it was a change of pace and a hard
Mhm.
shift, a hard shift, it is now putting me on track or in a direction towards my destiny that I never saw this path coming, but the path has proven to be purposeful.
Mhm. Well, it's important to also just think about like the paths that like we travel, right?
Hmm.
It's thinking that oftentimes we don't know where they may lead, but it's important to I like trust your gut, right? And or choose which path because
Hmm.
when you get to that fork in the road, it's thinking like where do you go?
Hmm.
And particularly when it's like in the age of COVID, right, 19, it's a lot of decision making that like you have to do
Yes.
and decide of like, are you going to go this way? Or are you going to go that way? Are you going to go this direction? That
Hmm.
like, and it's also thinking about like minimizing your risk, right? And
Yeah.
so when we think about um, other like health disparities that like exist within our community. One that comes to mind, particularly like with United We Rise, the focus is also like centered in HIV.
Yeah.
because we know like the disparities that exist within like Black communities, particularly like the Black gay and queer community, but also within like Black women, Black trans
Yes.
women, literally in every aspect of a Black body,
Hmm.
which is like why it is like called Every Black Body, because this is an issue that like we all like are impacted by, and that affects us. And so, like when it comes to HIV, particularly like for prevention and treatment, what would be your advice for people that work in public health?
I would say use mm, this is here we go. I will cite an issue that I see and
Mhm.
then present a solution, if you will.
Hey.
And so what I don't see in like current media or in media that is like based in right now is characters living full lives who also are living with HIV. What I don't see is characters who are taking PrEP. What you rarely see are characters who are intentionally using condoms. And so, what we can now do, especially with organizations who have the opportunity, who may have grant funding or who have, other ways to kind of produce content with what's available to us on YouTube and streaming and IGTV and Facebook Live and all these things. I think it's really important to start developing content and not just conversations. Like the conversations are great, right?
Yeah.
But what happens when we start developing content where you're able to see these people who are living with HIV also living full lives, or where you're able to see people who are out and about and living their lives and like sex positive, also taking PrEP, also using condoms. Like it's about really, especially within the Black community, taking off that veil of, don't have sex before marriage,
Right.
because the thing is people are having sex before marriage, and if people are having sex before marriage and we want to just keep ignoring it, then what we're eventually doing is allowing this virus to continuously ravage through our community. But what we can do on the other side of it is start creating examples of people, like examples throughout media, because though that's what we all watch TV, we all watch movies, and there are so many of us who like want a pair of Manolo Blahniks because Carrie wore them, or want a Telfar bag because Issa and Carrie won all season on Insecure, and or go to certain places to eat or visit certain
Mhm.
places for vacation and blah blah. So we are picking up social cues on how to shape our lives based off of what we see in TV and film, and so a part of that is seeing life, is seeing vibrance, is seeing safe sex practices, is seeing people who are living with HIV but who are still alive and thriving. And I think it's important for organizations who have a way of impacting media to start stepping into that space. And even if it's not, on HBO Max, if it's in your way, if it's in your voice, if it's in a way that impacts the community that you serve, then it's doing its job. It's what Moby did with Moby Talks, and with the digital series that you all released this summer. It was creating pieces that spoke to people who you may not necessarily hear from all the time, whose lives you may not see all the time in your favorite highly rated TV show, but it's creating media and trusting the organic nature and the truth telling of that media to do the legwork for you. It's very faith without works is dead, and it's like we cannot keep just talking to each other, the same people who know about these things, who know about PrEP, who know about testing, who know about. We can't keep having these conversations with ourselves. We have to start finding ways to get this information, not through a pamphlet, but finding ways, creative ways that use the resources that are available to us in this digital age to create engaging content that gets this information across.
I wish I had like these little hearts like on my lives. They would literally be going off right now because this is exactly why I wanted to one have a conversation with you.
Hmm.
Particularly because it's oftentimes like we are like sometimes we exist in our silos of our industries, right?
Hmm.
Or our silos of our professions and our careers. And it's thinking about like what are the things that like we don't see, right? So when you
Hmm.
have a different like lens and a different gaze, like that you can reimagine what it looks like. I know that for me, when I had like created Moby, that was the whole purpose of like, I didn't want us to exist to replace something. I didn't want
Hmm.
us to exist to like be competitive against other things that are existing. It really was just thinking about what would public health look like if we had all these different folks from other industries, like professionals in their own lanes, in their
Hmm.
own rights, that like approach like how we like talk about health and wellness differently,
Yeah.
right? And in from there, like it birthed Moby Talks, it birthed Moby Fest, it birthed like literally the success of the organization and initiative and the programming that we did. But it was also like because it didn't exist like in a way of where we have actual buy-in from community, where we
Yeah.
have actual buy-in across the board of in at every level, right? And so it's not just like myself that's running the organization. It's like me and my team. It's me and other folks that have like this diverse and richness of like a publicist, of events, of someone else that works in community engagement, of visual arts, like something that's visually compelling, something that feels different. And I think oftentimes we don't have these conversations about like what sort of kind of are those gaps, right?
Yeah.
In the power that like in media also expanding it, right? Because social media is another form now of media and like and how that cultivates like culture. And when we think about like the cultivation of culture and when we think about like the agendas that are being set, it's like if we're not having these conversations or being represented inside of these particular spaces, then what does it say to people that like are consuming it? What does it
Right.
say to people that like see it and don't see themselves? And
Yeah.
so the crazy thing is that I believe like once Pose comes back on, that will be the only show on network television that will have like HIV positive characters. That's the only show. And that's a show that's also a decade and a timepiece. Do you know what I'm saying? And so we don't
Very
even
much.
have a current existing show that like will showcase like what HIV looks like today. But we will have shows that will showcase sex. We will have shows that will showcase like the black queer character, the
Hmm.
black queer best friend,
Hmm.
and then we'll have our reality television, which I love.
Right. But
But
that's why that's why fullness is so important. And I
mhm,
think that's why that word just keeps coming up for me.
yeah,
Um, because to your to your like question about like what organizations can do, you see so many like there's a digital series called Giants that
hmm
I watched and I love, and for like their first two seasons it was just on YouTube and like self-funded, and like crowdfunding and all those things. And it's like, this is a good show with good writing and good acting and everything. If they can do this, then what does it, what can we do? Podcasts that we're all listening to podcasts and being seen as like a new podcast that just came out in collaboration with Vive Healthcare, and like that is doing that's doing engaging content in a way that's on trend, in a way that people are listening to easily, and it's taking all of those things and it's talking about spirituality, it's talking about stigma, it's talking about, and so I think it's really really important now for us to really look at the landscape of media, and not traditional media, as you said, like with social media, not just music, buying CDs, watching basic cable, and going to the movie theaters. That is done. Like that time is done. And if you're still like trying to live in that space, then you're behind and you're not doing the work. Like you're not doing like the now work, the work that needs to be done in 2020 is about looking at the spectrum of the space of media and finding where your voice is and leaning into it. It is not, when I tell you it's not about a pamphlet, it is not about a pamphlet. Nobody's reading a pamphlet.
Yeah, no, and I think it speaks to innovation. It speaks
Yes.
to, like, again, like, how do we engage communities?
Yes.
Because that's the purpose. It's like, if I don't have another conversation about the same topic with the same, like, folks, like,
Mhm.
I'd be happy. Do you know why? Because it means that we've done enough talking to each other that we
Mhm.
finally can talk to other people, right? And
Yeah.
bring other people into these conversations. And so we're gonna get towards the, like, end of this, but before we do,
Yeah.
let's just play a little game.
Okay.
So think about the road ahead, all right? And it's gonna be a
Mhm.
lot of metaphors, so everyone pay attention. So imagine this, right? So you're crossing a street
Mhm.
where media, health, race, and COVID-19 all intersect. So it's a four-way street, a busy intersection. So you have health this corner, you
Mhm.
have race on the other one, you'll have COVID-19 here, and media there.
Mhm.
What do you see at that intersection?
I see opportunity.
Mm,
I see an opportunity to tell stories in fresh and innovative ways and tell stories that amplify the voices of a marginalized community, to not do life and work and outreach and
mm,
entertainment in the same way that we did pre the pandemic. This is an age of enlightenment. This is a renaissance, especially for Black creatives. And I think if you try to fight against those things or try to do things in the way that they were done before March 2020, you are doing yourself, your creativity, your imagination a disservice. Right now, as far as like health and wellness, COVID-19, Blackness, queerness, and media, it is a moment to really shape safe digital spaces and really go to people, not just the people who would usually, like, say if you were doing a show in Atlanta and those like 200 people come to my show and I'm able to talk to those 200 people for that night, and then they kind of go out and they talk to whoever, they may follow me on Instagram or all those things. Like, we have the opportunity to reach people all around the world. And if you're only
mm,
caught up in like, oh, I can't, we can't have our normal conference that we would have where we're talking about, prevention and awareness and all those things, then you're staying stuck. If you're
right.
saying, oh, I can't go have a meeting at Netflix right now, or I can't like shoot how I used to shoot with like a whole bunch of extras and all that stuff, so I'm not going to do anything. You're keeping yourself stuck. All
Mm,
of those things right now, the digital space to me creates freedom,
mm,
and it has created freedom, and it has created opportunities for me to fashion work that I literally only dreamt about. And so now I think in that intersection, there's opportunity for us to disconnect from the things that served us in the past and plug into new and innovative ways of getting our stories across and getting our missions amplified.
mm. Absolutely. Because I believe everything about that vision that you see, right? Because it is the Upswell. Welcome to Upswell Boulevard. But that's where we are because it it is a moment, I think now more than ever before, actually, like where we can finally center, like, disparities with marginalized communities, with actual solutions and possible, like, financial support.
Hmm.
And I say
Hmm.
possible because we know who holds the purse strings, right? And it's
Right.
not always people that look like us. It's not always people that, again, love like us. It's not people that always want to support us.
Hmm.
And so it is just thinking that, like, there's opportunity that does exist inside of this particular moment. And I think that's often the thing that people like sometimes like lose sight of, right? Because of all the other distractions, like at any intersection, still on this analogy, metaphor journey. But it's like, but at any intersection, you know, there is like other traffic, there's other vehicles, but it's those are those distractions that keep you from seeing the opportunity that can exist inside of this. Now, COVID-19 has totally put the world on pause, most of the world, depending on where you live in the US. However, but for real, it's really just thinking that it's okay. Like to a degree of that, it's okay to finally hit that pause button, right? It's okay to finally like take that time in this moment to think about how do we reimagine like what this world could look like? How can
Hmm.
we reimagine how we do media? How can we reimagine how we do health? How do we reimagine social justice for Black people? And reparations and what that looks like. And it won't
Yeah.
be the 40 acres and the mule, but
Hmm.
it's like, you know, actual quality healthcare, actual access to healthcare, actual conversations about what isn't working and how all these systems literally were not built to like
Yeah.
advance or sustain or like keep us like thriving. And so it really is just thinking, you know, at this moment, now more than ever, community is the most
Yeah.
essential part that
For
we
sure.
have. And community engagement is the most like essential thing that we have because it doesn't matter what the policies are. It doesn't matter what anything else that is happening. If you don't have community supporting you, if you don't have community backing you, and again, community looks different, right, than how it did before. Because I think before people would be able to measure community by constituents, right? By
Right.
numbers of people that show up, but not realizing how folks are connected and how people like have been able to navigate within those particular communities. So
Yeah.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
No.
Yes.
So we're gonna close, but that was really, really great. And
No.
I'm looking forward to like continuing the conversation. And again, like when we think about the road ahead, can you tell us like how to connect with you, but also how do we support you?
Well, you can follow me on all social media platforms at Mr. Glamrock Soul. My
Hmm.
website is mrglamrocksoul.com, and you can support my music. You can stream by, add to your playlist on all streaming platforms, all digital platforms. Just type in Victor Jackson. My singles, Venom and He Belongs to the City, are available right now. I'm finishing up my EP. And I just spent the last 48 hours shooting two music videos. So those will be coming out in a few weeks as well. And vote. That's how you can support me. You can vote. You can
Yeah,
vote. You know, you can vote against oppression. You can vote against um systemic racism. You can vote against all the things that have
transphobia.
transphobia, you know, xenophobia. You can vote. And that's how you can support me more so than anything else, because I don't think that my blackness and my queerness uh, can live through another term of this level of oppression and hate and discord. And so that is the ultimate way that you can
Yeah.
support me.
And again, community engagement is civic engagement.
Yeah.
And so it's also just realizing that, yes, utilize like your right to vote, utilize your privilege to vote if you're able to, and don't feel as if like you're disconnected to not be involved.
Hmm.
So know your candidates, know like who's running, know what they're voting for. Again, community, like know
Yes.
who supports you in your community, in your interests and your friends and your networks of
Yeah.
folks. So thank you for that. Thank you to United We Rise. And please stay connected with United We Rise across all platforms at every Black body. Get engaged with them. They're doing amazing work. There'll be a convening later on in the year that we will hopefully we'll send you an invite, Victor. But for other folks that want to join the conversation and learn more about like what it is that we're working on, visit everyblackbody.org. Again, everyblackbody.org, to keep up with the initiative and the current and future happenings for the organization. And so until next time, have a good night. And thank you again for tuning in. Bye.
Bye.